Hi folks, Jess and Al from the Site Collective. Thanks for joining us again.
Today we are going to talk to you about sleep, okay? So Al and I have done a fair bit of work on sleep within our clinical training and our clinical work, and we've come up with a bit of a paradigm to really kind of cut to the chase around what's happening for people who are experiencing sleep problems. We're going to spend a bit of time kind of briefly exploring that today, and then we'll bring some subsequent videos that'll talk more about kind of actionable content of what are you actually going to do about it. So our theory on sleep is a balance between sleep drive and arousal.
Let's get this down. Okay, so what we're talking about is sleep.
Sleep drive, sleep pressure.
Sleep pressure. Yep, so sleep pressure is more than arousal. What do we get?
Sleep.
Beautiful. But if sleep pressure is less than arousal, what do we get? Awake. And guess what? You can't do anything. If your sleep pressure is greater than your arousal, you will sleep whether you want to or not.
Yep.
If your sleep pressure is less than your arousal, you'll stay awake no matter what you want.
Yep.
Okay? That's
it.
Incontrovertible. We're all done. Thank you very much. There might be some more detail.
Little bit more. Okay, so what we want to break down is what does sleep pressure actually involve, and then what does arousal actually involve? Because if you look at insomnia, whether people have difficulty falling asleep, whether people have difficulty they manage to fall asleep but then they wake up at some point throughout the night and can't get back to sleep, all of this is coming into play, okay? So where insomnia exists, this is the sort of dynamic that we're looking at, right? So sleep pressure, a couple of things that we're looking at with sleep pressure.
Let's do it.
My turn to write.
Okay.
First thing that we need to take into consideration, circadian rhythm. Talk about that one.
Okie dokes. So your circadian rhythm, okay, this is what goes out of whack when you get jet lagged, okay? So in general, we wake up in the morning when the sun's shining, we spend the day getting lots of light in our eyes, and come the evening, it gets dark, all right? There's not so much light around, obviously, unless you're indoors. And we become more and more, or less and less awake, shall we say.
Yep.
And that happens pretty predictably over a 24-hour cycle. It's like our drive to be awake.
Yeah. So the circadian rhythm is like the internal body clock. And so there's two parts of that. Is you've got your sleep drive and your wake drive, okay? So if we've got consistency in what time you wake up and what time you go to bed, we should have a relative consistency within your circadian rhythm, balancing these two components. Where we see problems with that is shift workers will really struggle with this sort of stuff because they'll have different wake up and drastically different wake up sleep times, or where people start to get into what we term social jet lag. So if they're kind of staying up really late on weekends, sleeping in late on weekend mornings, and then having a different routine during the week, we see disruption with circadian rhythm.
Yeah, and the other way you can get it that's a little bit more subtle than those ways is, let's say you're an office worker and you're in kind of dimmish lights all day long, you're not really getting outside, and then you get home and you put the lights on in an evening and they're pretty bright given that it's an evening. It's sort of similar to how bright your office was. So you're getting this sort of like constant kind of light, all right, without a big wedge of bright light and then some dim light. You're just kind of in this sort of, bright twilight, I guess, for 15, 16 hours of the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which doesn't mimic normal natural light exposure, which is kind of dull in the morning, bright during the day, dull, and then darkening at nighttime. Okay. The other thing is adenosine.
So adenosine is a chemical that builds up in everywhere, but in our brain is where it's most relevant here. As we're awake, it starts building up. It builds up and builds up and builds up. So, if I were to graph that out, so this, you wake up, it's pretty low, okay? And then as you're awake, it's building up and it's building up and it's building up. If you have a nap, down it goes, all right? But if you don't have a nap, okay, it just keeps building up, all right? And as that builds up,
You reach a critical threshold.
we feel more and more tired. So this is the sort of sleep drive part of this rhythm, okay? So our tiredness starts to become more and more overwhelming. And it'll get to a certain point where the tiredness feels irresistible, and hopefully we're getting adequate light cues that our wake drive is dampening down. So this is what gets mucked up in jet lag, where you can feel totally discombobulated because those two things are out of sync. All right, discombobulate.
I like it. Nice one.
All right. Anyways, so hopefully this is happening all naturalistically, and we get up to a threshold here, okay, where we're starting to feel extremely tired.
Yep.
Okay. Now, you got another one on that?
No, I was going to say kind of as you sleep, then we start to consume it and it drops back down again. You wake up and it's kind of down to zero and it builds back up again. But coming back to over here, and I think this is where you're about to go, if your arousal is too high, then kind of your adenosine, that threshold sits up here instead of down here, and you've kind of got to push it up over that ledge.
Yeah, that's right. So let me just do this again, kind of a bit. All right. So let's subsume the circadian wake drive and the adenosine sleep drive, and just call that sleep pressure for now. Okay. So sleep pressure is going up, and I'm super chill today. Like there's nothing stressing me out. I'm just totally chill. Okay. So here's the sort of threshold that it will take for me to fall asleep, okay? And boom, I'm asleep now, you beauty, okay? And the adenosine will work its way down as we go. All right, very good. All right, but let's say this isn't the case. Let's say there's been some absolute calamity. There's some coronavirus, or whatever it is. There's some like major thing that is freaking me right out, okay? Well, now my arousal's a lot higher, so my threshold's right up here now. Okay, so it was here, my threshold's gone up, so I need to have a lot more sleep pressure to cross this threshold. Okay, so this is where, so in this second instance, what's happened here, my sleep pressure is less than so I still have heaps of sleep pressure, but I've got so much arousal, I can't help but be awake. All this stuff is going on in my mind.
Yeah, so what you can see there is kind of, say if the arousal is really low, it's like 7, 8 o'clock at night and you're kind of doing the nods on the couch because nothing much is happening. But if you've had a really, really busy or stressful day, this might be 2 o'clock in the morning. You've had all that extra adenosine accumulating, but you're still having difficulty falling asleep because you've got so much going on that's causing the stress that's keeping that arousal threshold up.
That's right. So here's a really common scenario, okay? So I hear about sleep problems all the time, and the most common thing I hear is, oh, Doc, I have this problem sleeping, and it's fine. I'll lie in the lounge and I'll be watching something boring on Netflix and I'll fall asleep. But then when I go to bed, my brain's like kind of doing a mile a minute. So what's going on there is the Netflix, whatever they're watching is de-arousing relative to all the kind of calamities going on in their mind. So they're forgetting about the calamities, all right? So that's reduced their arousal down. So now the sleep drive is at a point where they can fall asleep. But they go to bed, they don't have that de-arousal mechanism anymore. All right. Guess what? They've gone from the first equation to the second equation, and they're awake. And it's not until finally the sleep pressure catches up with them 2 hours later, okay, or they solve the problems that are kind of keeping them awake, and their arousal comes down.
The third component we need to talk about on this side is your melatonin. Now you've taken up my board space here, so I'm going to squeeze it in here.
We'll get rid of that.
Done. Okay. Melatonin.
Melatonin.
Okay. So melatonin is a hormone. It's naturally produced by the body. You may have heard from kind of, you can buy it online, you can get supplements for it and things like that, but melatonin is a hormone that regulates the timing of sleep. Okay, it's not so much going to be the thing that makes you fall asleep. It's more around a hormone that is released that activates the timing or the preparedness for your brain and body to go to sleep. The way it works is that behind your optic nerves, in where that kind of optic chiasm is, so where the two nerves come in from your eyeballs, they meet in the middle, slightly above that is something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Big fancy word for basically something that means the part of your brain that is paying attention to the amount of light in your environment, okay? So what the suprachiasmatic nucleus does is it tracks the amount of light in your environment. As the light starts to drop down, i.e. sunset, it starts getting darker, it sends a message to the brain, it releases the melatonin from the pineal gland and says, start getting ready for sleep, nighttime is coming, okay? So the melatonin's released, the brain and the body start this kind of calm down de-arousing process, gets you ready to go to sleep. However, if you have a artificially bright environment in the evening that sustains a high level of light, that doesn't give you that natural reduction as you would get with kind of sunset, you're not getting the trigger in the brain saying, hey, start getting ready for bed, because you go from bright light, bright light, bright light, bright light, ooh, it's 10 o'clock, I better go to bed, I gotta go to work tomorrow, turn off the light, go to bed, and your brain goes, where'd that come from? I didn't get the warning for that, I haven't started my prep work yet. So you turn off the light, you go to bed, and then your body starts to prepare you for sleep. So you're then lying in bed awake while all of that preparation is happening until you can actually kind of get that sleeping process.
Yeah. So there's the sleep drive, there's the awake drive,
Yeah.
and so that's what you're talking about is that awake
Yeah.
drive. It's because you haven't had the darkness that hasn't cued the melatonin, and your body's thinking, or your mind is all cued
Yeah.
to be really kind of awake. Okay, so you want to be able to sort of remove that light source to coax up the melatonin, so you feel less awake rather than more sleepy. So that's it.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things you can do around this, and we've got a handout for this on the sleep section on our website for thepsychcollective.com, is ways to start reducing your light exposure in the late evening, preparing yourself for sleep. And the flip side, increasing your light exposure early in the morning in the beginning to kind of set your wake drive for the day as well. Yeah, okay. We've covered on sleep pressure. Let's have a look at arousal. What's the stuff that's actually keeping you awake? The number one thing, as we've already touched on, I'm going to come over this side, stress. One of the biggest things that will contribute to keeping you awake and keeping your brain active and your mind busy and dropping your ability to fall asleep at night is going to be stress. Okay?
Yep.
Anxiety will kind of fall into part of that. Worry of some form.
I'd kind of, with stress, I probably think it's worth, because usually it's not like there's one thing. I mean, sometimes there is one thing. Usually it's this amalgam of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd kind of broadly call that kind of this sort of internal chaos.
Yep.
Okay.
Then there's other stuff that's going to be happening. Your environment itself. Okay. If the neighbours are having a noisy party, if the dog next door won't shut up, and even can be environment within your house itself. If you've got kids that are waking up throughout the night, if you've got a partner who's snoring all night or thrashing around having nightmares, or they've got their sleep apnea so they're gasping for breath throughout the night, there can be external disturbances that are going to contribute to your arousal that keeps you awake. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Caffeine. Now this one's twofold.
Yeah.
So caffeine is an adenosine blocker. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So we mentioned how as your adenosine goes up, your drive to sleep gets more and more profound. Well, caffeine kind of gets in the way of that. Okay, it sort of blocks the little adenosine receptor there. So you have a lot of adenosine floating around, but the caffeine kind of blocks it off and says, no, there's plenty of plenty of time. We don't need to go to sleep yet. There's not that sleep drive going on. Okay, so the caffeine that's one action of the caffeine, but the caffeine's also a stimulant in its own right, so it increases arousal. So it works on both sides of this equation. So yeah, I guess the message there is some caffeine in the morning is fine. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you get the caffeine crash, okay, that actually helps with de-arousal. So that can potentially be helpful if you have it early enough, all right? Yeah. But if you're having caffeine late in the equation, especially if you're having a lot of it and accumulating it during the day, well, guess what, folks? You're blocking your adenosine and you're stimulating your mind. Yeah. So that's a recipe to stay awake. Now, people will say, but I used to be able to drink caffeine all night long and blah, blah, blah. Well, what you could get away with in your 20s is a different story to today. If your sleep is fragmented and your sleep is otherwise kind of a bit crappy, that's an obvious thing to try and get rid of.
Yeah. So remember that sleep on average has a half-life of 6 hours. That means after 6 hours, about 50% of the caffeine's out of your system. But as you get older, that half-life could be pushed out to 7 hours, maybe even up to 8 hours as we get older. Okay, so it'll take longer for your body to metabolize it, and it also has a cumulative effect. Okay, so if you've had that kind of latte at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, be aware of the fact that at 10 o'clock at night, you've still got 50% of that latte in your system. All right, and remember your sneaky caffeine. Tea, cola drinks, chocolate are some of the big ones for it.
Yeah, the other big thing on the arousal side of the equation, I think, is alcohol.
Yes.
Okay, so a really common thing that people do to deal with this arousal, okay, because there's various ways of actually tackling the issue of arousal, and I think we'll talk about that on another clip. But the most common thing that people do is they have some booze, okay? So I can't sleep unless I have a few drinks, Doc. I hear that a lot. And then I also hear, yeah, I fall asleep just fine, but at about 2 or 3, I wake up and then I sort of go back to sleep. I'm sort of awake and it's all a bit kind of crappy and this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So what's happening there is the alcohol is serving as a de-arousal agent, okay? So that's getting us increasing our arousal. Sorry. Decreasing our arousal. Thank you. So now we're asleep. The problem with alcohol, of course, is as it wears off, that effect goes. But even worse is you get a rebound effect. Okay. So it actually increases your arousal. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, you mightn't be especially stressed out about something, but the alcohol alone can wake you up. Mm-hmm. Okay, because of the increase in arousal. you've now got more arousal than sleep drive. 2 in the morning, bing, you're awake.
Yeah. So it'll also block your REM sleep, so you're not getting into that kind of dreaming stage of sleep.
Yeah, well, you don't even get a chance to.
No, because you've woken up
you're
from
awake.
it. But the other thing is for those people, I mean, a couple of drinks and then kind of go fall asleep, okay, but when people drink to excess and get to that point of passing out, let's be clear that that passed out state of alcohol kind of induced, I'm going to call that a state of non-wakefulness, which is not the same thing as sleep. So there's very particular electrical activity that occurs in your brain as a part of sleep. That doesn't happen under the influence of extreme amount of alcohol.
Yeah, it's not fully restorative. I mean, you do get the reduction in adenosine. Okay, so you do. I mean, you don't have that same kind of sleepiness as though you've been awake for 48 hours or something. So that gets purged. Okay, but you're not getting what we call sleep architecture is very disrupted. So you're not getting the deep sleep, which is very helpful for restoration of all kinds of bodily systems. You're not getting the REM sleep, which is also helpful for consolidation of memory and physical skills and so forth. So you're not getting any of that, okay? You tend to actually become more and more forgetful because you're not consolidating memories as well. So disruption of sleep architecture by consistently relying on alcohol to sleep sort of puts you in this limbo world. Okay, now some people function great, don't get me wrong, you know, some people might say, well, I do this and I'm fine and I'm a genius and great, but plenty of us non-geniuses really do get knocked around by this.
Okay, I think the next one to talk about food, particularly around sugar. So being mindful of some of the food choices that we make, particularly in the later evening, and especially if we're kind of snacking on desserts, sugary snacks, that sort of thing, is going to, because sugar's a stimulant, as you eat that chocolate bar 20 minutes before you go to bed, you get into bed, your body starts to metabolize that, the sugar's being released into your bloodstream about the time that you're trying to fall asleep. So that can also be something that kind of triggers you. So that idea of having a hot chocolate before you go to bed, possibly less helpful.
Yeah, there's actually 2 effects going on here. Okay, so you've got that kind of pro alertness thing that you might be getting from the sugar. So then what happens is then insulin kind of kicks in, all right? And you know, if you're having a sugary snack, that really jacks up your blood sugar, and your body doesn't know the difference whether you've eaten half a cow or just had a chocolate bar. So, but either way, it thinks, well, I've had a big load here, makes a ton of insulin. Okay, now that's appropriate potentially. But the problem you get is then your blood sugar starts to go down quite quickly. And so all these counter-regulatory hormones kick in, including adrenaline and this kind of stuff. That's when people often feel really hungry as well, right? So you end up with this sort of roller coaster thing going on. And I was talking to a chap the other day and he was even snacking during the night because of this kind of effect. So, yeah, so avoiding sugar. I mean, look, I'm not a big fan of sugar in general. And if you see some of our other clips, you'll get that message. But what I'd say is before bedtime, getting off the roller coaster is critical. So if you must have carbs and stuff, have something that's going to be a slow burn rather than a big spike.
Yep.
Okay. What else? Temperature, yeah. So in general, you want to be on the cooler side. I mean, we've all had experiences of those sweltering nights where you just can't get to sleep and they're very sticky and uncomfortable. Cooler nights are generally favourable. So your body temperature will drop. Okay, so I mean, if you've got kids, if you ever feel them, like give them a little pat or something after they've been asleep for half an hour, usually they feel really warm. What's actually happening is they're dumping a lot of heat. Okay, they're changing their circulation, putting a lot out to the periphery, and they feel warm, but they're actually dumping heat. That's cooling their core temperature down, and that's helping them get more deeply asleep. It's more obvious with kids than with adults. Okay, they're better sleepers in general. The older you get, the crappier your sleep tends to be. Sorry, folks. So it's very noticeable with kids. It's certainly something you pick up with adults too. There's sort of arguments about how to go with that. You know, do you just cool your room down? Do you not have, you know, too thick a doona? Do you have a cool shower before bed? Some say a warm shower because of the dilatation. I'm not too sure. Whatever works for you, try different things.
Basically, get yourself as cold as you can at night time.
But not freezing. You know.
Not freezing. Yeah. And the last one we're going to talk about, nightmares. So this may be something that is more kind of not necessarily the beginning of the night in terms of getting to sleep, but certainly in terms of sleep maintenance. So people find that more towards the second half of their sleep cycle, which is when we have more REM sleep, thus it's more about dreaming sleep, and when we're more prone to experiencing nightmares, especially if there's been experiences of trauma, any sort of PTSD sort of stuff that can elevate the distress associated with the nightmares. People find they have their nightmares, it wakes them up. There's a really, really heightened sense of arousal. There can be a bit of nocturnal panic. and then we get to the nightmares have increased arousal that then causes difficulty in getting back to sleep after the nightmares. We might do a talk separately on that later around some strategies for managing the nightmares themselves in terms of the arousal that they can cause.
Yeah, there are some medications used for people who get really bad nightmares called alpha blockers, which seem to interfere with the adrenaline that the nightmare causes feeding back into the brain and sort of, you know, making the nightmare more and more scary. So often people will sleep through that. Well, I don't even know if you call it a nightmare because it all sort of gets blocked. But the other thing people get who, if they regularly get nightmares, is they have an increased arousal at bedtime because they're like, oh, am I going to have a nightmare tonight? You know, and they get this increase of arousal happening too. So managing nightmares is important. So
yeah,
definitely do something on that.
Yeah, we will. So what I want you to kind of take away from today is we'll come back and explain some of these more concepts in more detail in future videos. We just wanted to give an overview today. But I want you to think about if sleep is a balance between sleep pressure and arousal, what can you do to increase your sleep pressure? A lot of that is actually going to come down to regular bedtime, regular wake time, and reduce your light exposure in the evenings. And then also, what are you going to do around your arousal? And some of this stuff is going to be behavioral, relaxation techniques, do something boring before bed, do something to calm your brain and your body down before you go to sleep. If you've got a lot of distress, or worries or things like that, using some strategies around journaling. We're going to do a Wired and Tired video coming up after this one to talk about some strategies for managing that. And then also ways of kind of making some more skillful choices around caffeine use, sugar, food, and alcohol use to make sure that you're not inadvertently driving up your arousal at a time when we actually want you to start quietening things down. Okay? Yeah. So that's it from us today, guys. We are from thepsychcollective.com. Head over to our website for more information. Find us on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram to hit us up. And we'll see you for the next video shortly. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.